Furthermore, I would advise the representative that I dedicated 15 years working as a state litigator long before she cleared her licensing test. I understand what proof actually resembles. I recognize what a legitimate inquiry entails. Yet what I observe from your side of the panel is neither. The top prosecutor gently laid aside her marker with the intentional smoothness of someone who just concluded an argument she deemed definitive. Seated behind her, a line of federal lawyers remained in the specific, watchful, quiet characteristic of personnel assigned to spot trouble long before anyone else notices it. Up at the raised judicial bench, conservative lawmakers bobbed their heads in the cadence of individuals assured that the proceedings would go smoothly. This legislative oversight chamber in the fall of 2025 possessed the specific mood of a congressional inquiry that everyone anticipated would merely be a performance. The witness had appeared under oath previously. She understood the proceedings. She recognized which politicians intended to pontificate, which ones planned to pose genuine inquiries, and how to spot the distinction merely 30 seconds into their introductions. She had studied appropriately. She remained unprepared for the Texas representative, though not because she was unaware of her reputation. The Attorney General had received the briefings. She had reviewed the media clips, the viral moments, the methodology of how the Congresswoman operated, the composure, the binder, the records positioned individually onto the desk with the endurance of somebody who had already triumphed and was just allowing the audience to reach that identical verdict. The witness had informed her media staff the previous evening that the representative was talented, yet she felt superior in a trial setting than a congressional chamber, adding that the Congresswoman had never practiced in an actual court. It represented the sort of phrase you utter the previous evening when you require some self-assurance. The lawmaker remained perfectly still while the witness talked, never adjusted her posture, and displayed no outward reaction when the prosecutor highlighted her legal background, her 15 years doing the grunt work, and her credibility as the sole individual present who grasped what actual proof was. She patiently allowed the witness to conclude. Then she raised her gaze. "Madam Attorney General," her tone remained steady and conversational, possessing the cadence of an individual who had anticipated precisely this exact opportunity. "You brought up evidence. I would love to utilize the upcoming hour examining yours." She unzipped her binder. "Let us begin with something that the majority of folks ignore. Back in late summer of 2013, you served as the top prosecutor for Florida. An inmate named Marshall Lee Gore was slated to receive lethal injection. You directly reached out to the state executive and petitioned him to postpone the procedure." She raised her eyes. "Could you explain to this panel the reason?" The witness possessed a rehearsed response for this inquiry. She anticipated this specific topic might surface. She prepared statements regarding administrative factors, regarding the duties of top prosecutors during lethal injection proceedings, and regarding the intricate nature of the procedure being postponed for a 3-week window. The representative stated, placing a paper onto the desk, "Not due to a judicial motion, not due to fresh discoveries, and not due to any judicial mandate or request from the defending attorneys." The formal justification provided was an itinerary clash. She stared directly at the witness. "That itinerary clash happened to be your political donor event." The conservative lawmakers who were previously bobbing their heads abruptly ceased their movements. "You petitioned the Florida executive to reschedule a capital punishment procedure because it interfered with your campaign launch gathering." The representative placed down an additional paper. "You subsequently issued a public apology. You stated, and I am reciting your exact words, that you made a mistake. Therefore, the panel possesses your personal confession." She clasped her fingers together. "I bring this up, not since it represents the gravest matter I will review today. I bring it up since it demonstrates a baseline that this panel must comprehend before we move forward. Whenever your private and electoral goals clashed against your governmental obligations, we understand which path you selected. We understand it because you admitted it to us directly." The witness tightened her facial muscles. "Representative, I handled that incident openly and thoroughly a dozen years ago. I expressed my regrets publicly and on the record. The state executive and I progressed past it. The lethal injection was eventually administered. If you traveled here you expressed regrets purely because the media uncovered it, the lawmaker interjected as the atmosphere tensed. I am not stating that to sound cruel. I am stating it since the documentation indicates that the petition occurred, the timeline shifted, and your agency released absolutely nothing until media outlets published the story. The regret arrived strictly following the revelation. That chronology is critical while we analyze what motivates your administrative actions. Madam, that represents an inaccurate portrayal of— I will explain what is actually inaccurate, the representative countered. And for the initial moment, her tone carried a sharpness. It was not fury, but rather the sharpness of an individual who remained tolerant for an extended period and was acting meticulously regarding the details. What is inaccurate is an inmate on death row getting his execution schedule altered, not due to fresh proof or a judicial document, but rather because the top prosecutor experienced an itinerary clash. You admitted it yourself. Using your exact phrasing, you admitted making a mistake. I am simply reciting your phrase right back to your face. The witness attempted to reply. I traveled here to demonstrate a trend. Madam Attorney General. The representative grabbed an item from her binder. That lethal injection represents the initial data marker. The subsequent marker occurred during that exact same month. She positioned the initial paper onto the desk with the specific caution of somebody who understands exactly what it holds and what it signifies. In late summer of 2013, your agency fielded media questions regarding grievances against a certain real estate university. Your media representative informed the regional newspaper, and I possess the publication right here, that your agency was presently analyzing the claims. At that juncture, over 24 grievances had been submitted by state locals against the university and its associated organizations dating back a half-decade. 24 residents within your jurisdiction who spent thousands of dollars on a curriculum they were promised would transform their futures, who ended up swindled, and who turned to their regional prosecutor for assistance. She placed the newspaper clipping down. Your agency was completely aware of their existence. They were actively analyzing them. 24 individual complaints. The second piece of evidence. On the 9th of September, a private charitable foundation authorized a payment of $25,000 designated to your electoral fundraising committee. That payment was deposited by your fundraising group roughly a week later. The third piece of evidence. In the middle of the fall, your agency released a declaration. 0 inquiries and 0 consequences. You stated there remained no inquiry at that moment. 30 days following the payment, 24 grievances regarding an individual who recently penned your campaign a $25,000 payment vanished. 0 actual inquiries. She positioned all 3 papers in a straight row across the desk and stared at them for a second. It was the specific quietude of an attorney who just laid proof in front of a panel and allowed them a moment to process the information. 96 hours, Madam Attorney General. Your agency openly states it is examining the university. 96 hours following that, the payment lands. And subsequently, the issue gets completely shut down. The witness shifted toward her audio receiver. Her tone carried the disciplined composure of a litigation attorney who had faced far worse audiences than this one and understood the stakes. Representative, I have clarified this scenario multiple times throughout the past decade. I directly requested that contribution from the individual long before my agency was ever notified regarding the Northern litigation. This chronology you are fabricating? I am not fabricating any chronology, the lawmaker stated. I am reciting a documented one. These represent your own agency's internal messages, your campaign's own monetary disclosures, and the federal tax documentation. She positioned a 4th paper onto the desk. Here is an internal electronic message from early September of 2013. Your primary administrator is handling media inquiries from journalists asking regarding the university and the Northern litigation. I need you to observe the timestamp on this record. She rotated it to point at the witness. Your primary administrator knew regarding the Northern University litigation in early September, right before the payment landed. You asserted that you directly requested the contribution and remained oblivious to the litigation during that period. She stared at the witness unflinchingly. Those dual assertions cannot simultaneously be accurate. Either your primary administrator knew and failed to inform you, which implies your agency was so terribly run that your senior deputy concealed major consumer deception claims from you while you were simultaneously ringing up the target of those claims to request electoral funds, or you were fully aware. Representative, my personnel managed everyday media questions constantly without escalating them up to my desk. That is precisely how an operational agency functions. Representative, I managed a massive department. My personnel routinely made the calls. 24 individual complaints, the lawmaker stated. Everyday media questions? A single fresh claim emerged while I held the position. Just one single claim. The previous 24 originated prior to my administration. The Northern prosecutor initiated a civil litigation while you held the position, the lawmaker stated. That was not a grievance from an isolated buyer. That represented a state prosecutor litigating against the individual for coordinated deception. Your media representative informed the regional paper that your agency was analyzing the situation. Are you asserting to this panel that your primary administrator was handling media questions regarding an ongoing multi-jurisdictional litigation and opted not to bring it up to you? I remained completely unaware. On the 5th of September, your agency openly stated it was analyzing the university scenario. The lawmaker grabbed the paper and read the timestamp distinctly. On the 19th of September, exactly 2 weeks later, the individual authorized the payment. A couple of days prior, it landed in your ledger. Subsequently, the analysis terminated. 0 inquiry, 0 consequences, and 0 justification other than the Northern litigation would supposedly offer restitution. She placed the paper back down. You portrayed your agency as massive and heavily occupied. I am questioning how a massive, heavily occupied agency analyzing an ongoing multi-jurisdictional consumer deception litigation terminated that analysis mere weeks after securing $25,000 from the individual facing the litigation. The decision was finalized by veteran personnel relying strictly upon legal metrics. Did the decision happen prior to or following the payment's arrival? Complete silence enveloped the room. The witness's primary counsel tilted forward and muttered something discreetly. She pivoted her head very subtly. The chronology represents the response to that inquiry, the lawmaker stated. And the chronology exists squarely within the public archives. She advanced to the subsequent paper. The Northern prosecutor initiated a civil litigation detailing the university as a deceptive operation. Your personal agency was fielding public questions regarding the matter. And whenever the analysis terminated, you portrayed the justification as a valid personnel decision that did not necessitate your input. She advanced to the subsequent paper. The federal tax agency concluded that the charitable entity's payment to your committee breached national statutes regarding the ban on philanthropic organizations supplying electoral funds. The entity remitted a modest financial penalty. That penalty exists within the public archives. The payment constituted an unlawful act under national statutes. I need the panel to comprehend exactly what that signifies. The exchange that deposited $25,000 into your electoral ledger constituted an unlawful exchange. The singular party in that unlawful exchange, who encountered absolutely 0 repercussions, 0 financial penalties, 0 punishments, and 0 official rulings, was you. Her tone never elevated in volume. It absolutely did not have to. The papers were performing the heavy lifting. In the meantime, roughly 4,000 alumni, several of them residing in your state, the very citizens you swore an oath to shield as their prosecutor, ultimately secured restitution via a massive settlement brokered by the Northern prosecutor. They waited for multiple years. They squandered thousands of dollars apiece. Several of them squandered their entire nest eggs. Several of them secured additional home loans based on guarantees that the curriculum peddled and subsequently failed to deliver. She stared at the witness unflinchingly. When those alumni required their state prosecutor to advocate for their interests, you possessed $25,000 from the individual who swindled them resting inside your electoral ledger, and your agency completely terminated the inquiry. She laid aside the marker she held during the entire exchange. Madam Attorney General, I plan to ask you straight up. Did that $25,000 payment relate to your resolution to ignore the university? The response arrived with the exactness of an individual who rehearsed it countless times over multiple years. I offer an unequivocal rejection, absolutely zero correlation, as personnel analyzed the grievances alongside the Northern litigation and finalized the proper conclusion that the Northern litigation would offer restitution to buyers across the nation. The payment originated from colleagues and backers I contacted during the standard process of securing resources. I committed absolutely nothing unethical. I would never permit any donation to sway my administrative behavior. The State Integrity Board, your personal State Integrity Board, the lawmaker stated, selected by conservative officials operating under conservative direction, analyzing this situation on behalf of the government, released an official ruling. I possess a copy right here. She raised it into view. The ruling declares, and I am reciting the formal text, that the circumstances could provoke skepticism. That represents the conservative selected integrity board's formal description of your behavior, not liberal politicians, not the media, and certainly not me. The governmental entity whose exact duty involved assessing this precise issue declared your behavior could provoke skepticism. She positioned the ruling onto the desk. That rests within the official archives of your state, forever tied to your administration as the top prosecutor. She compiled the various papers into a tidy stack. I want that entered into the record right now before we proceed. The congressional chamber's atmosphere shifted entirely. It felt incredibly subtle. The sort of shift occurs not via an isolated theatrical instance, but via the piling of records placed meticulously onto a desk, one item at a moment, until the desk gets blanketed and the reality becomes indisputable. The conservative lawmakers remained completely off their cellular devices. They were actively paying attention. That served as its own distinct indicator. The lawmaker accessed a fresh segment of her binder. Upon exiting your position as the state prosecutor roughly a half-decade later, you filed as an international proxy under the statutory registry and commenced advocacy on behalf of a Middle Eastern administration. I possess your registry document right here. She placed the federal submission onto the desk. Your agency's agreement stipulated an amount exceeding $100,000 roughly every 30 days. You advocated at the executive mansion, the legislature, and a dozen federal bureaus on the administration's behalf. Under the relevant statute, you met the legal criteria as a proxy for an international entity, a Middle Eastern administration functioning inside American borders. The rebuttal arrived instantaneously. She expected the Middle Eastern topic since her congressional vetting session. It was for anti-trafficking efforts leading into the global athletic tournament. It was a brief tenure, completely valid, and thoroughly documented. A senior lawmaker questioned you during your vetting session, the representative stated, regarding why you omitted your Middle Eastern advocacy as a possible ethical clash within your transparency documents. I possess the official record. She raised it into view. Your response indicated you felt extremely proud regarding the advocacy and desired it lasted an extended duration. She placed the official record onto the desk. I am not disputing whether anti-trafficking efforts possess merit. They undoubtedly do. I am inquiring regarding the ethical clash, which constitutes an isolated and distinct statutory issue. Therefore, allow me to clarify. I present a fresh paper, specifically the authorization submission. During the spring of 2025, 16 weeks into your tenure as the top prosecutor, you authorized the executive administration's receipt of an incredibly lavish aviation vessel acting as a donation from the Middle Eastern monarchy. This authorization necessitated your statutory signature. As the top prosecutor, you serve as the individual accountable for consulting regarding the lawfulness and ethical nature of executive administration actions. She arranged the registry document and the authorization records parallel onto the desk. The nation you authorized a massive aviation donation from matches the exact nation whose administration you formally represented. The identical nation your agency received 6 figures a month to advocate for in front of the exact bureaus you presently oversee. The identical nation. She illustrated the chronology using simple phrasing, each statement landing possessing the gravity of something recorded and corroborated. A half-decade ago, you registered as an international proxy for a Middle Eastern monarchy. You advocated to the legislature and federal bureaus on their dime. A year later, you abandoned that task to shield the executive during an ouster attempt. The proceedings concluded. You resumed the Middle Eastern advocacy. Fast forward to 2025, and you assumed the role of the top prosecutor. During the spring, you authorized the American administration receiving a lavish aviation vessel from that specific monarchy. She stared at the witness. During your vetting session, you testified you conferred with federal integrity administrators who greenlit your involvement. I need the panel to comprehend the architecture of that evaluation. The Integrity Bureau that greenlit you functions beneath your direct command as the top prosecutor. You underwent evaluation by a bureau that answers to you directly. Representative, that remains how the procedure operates regarding each senior executive appointee. The Federal Integrity Bureau preserves its autonomy irrespective of the organizational hierarchy. That autonomy remains organizational. Does it remain organizational enough, the lawmaker countered, to supersede the reality that the individual undergoing evaluation possesses the power to fire the personnel conducting the evaluation? Representative, that represents a pessimistic and honestly offensive portrayal of how our integrity protocol functions. It represents an organizational inquiry, the lawmaker stated, rather than a portrayal. I am inquiring if the Integrity Bureau genuinely operates autonomously from the individual possessing the power to terminate them. That constitutes zero offense. That constitutes an inquiry regarding systemic architecture. I adhered to every relevant guideline. I revealed my previous advocacy. I underwent the evaluation. I completed everything the statute demands. And subsequently, you authorized a massive financial donation from a Middle Eastern monarchy, the lawmaker stated. That remains the aspect I continuously return toward. You adhered to the procedure, and the procedure yielded a result wherein the top prosecutor of the nation, a former registered international proxy for a monarchy, authorized the administration acquiring a massive aviation vessel from that exact monarchy. If the procedure yielded that consequence, Madam Attorney General, the procedure requires investigation. The lawfulness of the donation underwent independent evaluation. By whom exactly? By the executive's judicial advisors and appropriate administrators. Did you engage in that evaluation? A brief hesitation followed. Madam Attorney General, did you personally engage in the executive's judicial evaluation regarding the aviation vessel's lawfulness? I supplied perspective as the top prosecutor regarding the statutory boundaries. You supplied perspective regarding whether it remained lawful for the executive to acquire a massive financial donation from a nation you previously advocated for, and you reported this perspective to the Integrity Bureau answering directly to you. The conservative lawmakers remained completely silent. A single member remained gazing at a stationary spot above the testimony desk, possessing the focus of an individual purposefully deciding to avoid partaking in the current situation. I desire absolute clarity regarding what I am and am not asserting, the lawmaker stated. I am absolutely not asserting a direct reciprocal exchange. I am stating that you possessed a substantial vocational and monetary background with the Middle Eastern monarchy. That this background forged a classic ethical clash. That you authorized a massive exchange incorporating that monarchy, and that you engaged in the statutory evaluation of that exchange. I am requesting this panel to examine that chronology and reach its personal conclusion. She elevated the lengthy correspondence. A fortnight prior, hundreds of alumni from your university, your legal academy, wherein you acquired your statutory training and swore your initial vocational pledge, endorsed an open correspondence addressed to the academy's administrator. She positioned it onto the desk. The correspondence declares that the top prosecutor's testimony featured evasions and a complete inability to supply direct, meaningful responses. It states that lawmakers representing both factions voiced alarm regarding the sufficiency and openness of the agency's reactions. And furthermore, it reads that they are petitioning their former academy to reiterate the moral standards instilled in them. She stared at the witness unflinchingly. Hundreds of attorneys, 0 liberal operatives, 0 electoral rivals, just lawyers who occupied the exact lecture halls you occupied, who studied the exact judicial precedents, who swore the identical pledge to the identical vocation. They observed your behavior and they attached their signatures to an open correspondence declaring you are failing to uphold what your academy instilled. A correspondence driven by electoral operatives is what that is. Penned by Johnny Barden, the lawmaker stated swiftly. The correspondence's creator resides in Florida. He openly declared that attorneys learn that honesty outweighs the verdict. He said we swear a pledge of honesty and openness while shielding individuals who lack the power to shield themselves. He added that pertains to everybody, certainly including the top prosecutor. She stared at the witness. The creator does not represent a liberal operative. He serves as a lawyer residing in your native state who observed your actions before this panel and felt distressed enough to rally hundreds of your collegiate peers to attach their signatures openly. That represents a vocational assessment, Madam Attorney General, delivered from individuals educated to the exact identical criteria you acquired. She shut that segment of her binder. Your very own peers. Now, the lawmaker stated, let us discuss the present moment. Your tenure as the top prosecutor, the sealed archives. Something altered regarding the witness's stance, incredibly slight, practically undetectable to the majority of the chamber. However, the lawmaker dedicated a decade inside judicial chambers observing individuals who appeared thoroughly prepped facing inquiries they remained inadequately prepped for. And she spotted the indicator. During the winter of 2025, the lawmaker stated, you featured on a conservative network. The anchor questioned you regarding the illicit patron registry. The registry that remained the focus of prolonged societal speculation that the victims desperately awaited to view that the legislature enacted a statute forcing your agency to disclose. I possess the printed transcript. I possess the video segment. She elevated both items. You declared on nationwide television to countless viewers, and I am reciting your exact phrasing, that it was resting on your table currently awaiting analysis. You stated that represented a mandate issued by the executive. She positioned the printed transcript and the captured frame onto the desk. Those represented your phrases during a broadcast, assigning a distinct mandate to the executive, suggesting the registry existed and remained under your control, and underwent analysis. She positioned an additional paper alongside the initial one. During the summer of 2025, several months subsequent to you declaring the registry rested on your table, your agency and the federal investigators released an official bulletin. I possess it right here. The bulletin declares, and I am reciting the formal text, that absolutely zero proof existed indicating an alleged registry of patrons ever existed. She stared at the witness. Winter, the registry rests on your table. Summer, your very own agency declares zero registry exists. A momentary pause of quiet followed. Madam Attorney General, were you deceiving the public during the winter, or are you deceiving the public currently? The chamber erupted. The mallet hammered repeatedly. Liberal lawmakers rose to their feet. Conservative lawmakers remained utterly motionless, exhibiting the specific motionless quality of individuals assessing instantly if they appear unbothered. Media photographers pivoted their lenses toward the witness's visage. A journalist situated in the leading tier snapped photographs rapidly. That inquiry Representative, that framing remains entirely unacceptable. It presumes malicious intent whenever numerous alternatives exist. I am requesting the alternative, the lawmaker stated. She remained calm amidst the chaos. Currently inside this chamber, you declared the registry rested on your table. Your agency declared zero registry exists. Those represent your phrases and your agency's phrases, and I am demanding you inform this panel which version remains truthful. Phrasing utilized during casual broadcast interviews remains frequently inaccurate. You said it is resting on my table, currently awaiting analysis. That represents a distinct, tangible, immediate declaration. Which phrase inside that remark remains inaccurate? The premise of that segment was misunderstood. Run the segment, declared a representative situated across the bench who stayed silent for nearly an hour. I possess it ready. Would you prefer I run it? That remains unneeded. Then explain what you intended, the lawmaker stated, because the victims inside this chamber waited endlessly regarding that registry. The populace waited. The legislature enacted a statute commanding your agency to disclose the relevant archives specifically due to societal clamor for this exact level of openness. And you appeared on nationwide television and informed countless individuals the registry rested on your table. If you misstated the facts, explain what you genuinely intended to communicate. If you failed to misstate the facts, explain what occurred with the registry. The witness leaned closer. Her tone acquired a sharpness. Representative, frankly, I provided greater openness regarding this situation compared to any previous regime. I disclosed countless records. I remained seated here for 3 hours addressing inquiries. I labeled the perpetrator a beast. I performed everything inside my authority to grant the victims the openness they warrant. They elevated their arms, the lawmaker stated. The witness paused. Every single victim inside this chamber, whenever a representative inquired how many among them remained uncontacted by your agency, every lone individual elevated their arms. Earlier today, 60 minutes prior, inside this chamber, she stared at the witness. That hardly constitutes openness. That constitutes the illusion of openness. A distinction exists, and the individuals situated at the rear of this chamber understand perfectly what that resembles. The chamber remained utterly quiet. The witness deflected the situation. She mentioned previous regime blunders. She brought up liberal politicians. She pointed out the former agency's history. She rehearsed this perfectly. She utilized it, possessing the proficiency of an individual deflecting scrutiny for decades. I prefer to inquire regarding a different topic, the lawmaker stated smoothly, a remark that landed possessing the subtle power of a gateway shutting. She accessed the rear section of her binder and extracted a paper featuring an emblem that the witness identified a split second before the lawmaker commenced reciting from it. This represents a declaration from the senior committee member distributed nearly a fortnight ago subsequent to the revelation that your agency monitored the query logs of lawmakers while they examined the unsealed archives. The congressional chamber fell legitimately silent during the initial instance throughout the entire duration. Not the responsive silence of a chamber absorbing a theatrical instance, but rather the silence of a chamber that just comprehended a grave statement occurred. Lawmakers, Madam Attorney General. Elected delegates of the populace executing their legally required oversight duty, examining records that the legislature enacted a statute to force your agency to yield, and your agency monitored whatever they queried. She placed the paper down. I desire to pose a remarkably basic inquiry. Pursuant to which legislation does the agency possess the power to track the query logs of lawmakers conducting their legislative obligations? The witness gaped openly. I demand a legislation. the lawmaker stated. Not an administrative justification, not a domestic defense theory, not a citation to confidential protocols. I seek a precise, titled legislation granting the executive branch, the branch you direct as the country's primary justice official, permission to monitor the congressional branch while it examines records it remains statutorily permitted to examine. The quietude that ensued persisted for a dozen seconds. The lawmaker's primary administrator, observing from the perimeter of the chamber, tallied them. The witness's primary judicial counsel leaned closer and muttered something critical. The witness pivoted her head in a minor gesture that was practically imperceptible. "We remain examining the statutory justification," the witness stated. The phrase settled into the chamber akin to a pebble tossed into motionless liquid. The representative situated across the bench interrupted. "I beg your pardon? Did you state you remain examining the statutory justification regarding an action your agency already executed? The statutory guidelines regulating legislative actions remain intricate, and I understand they remain intricate," the representative stated. "I am inquiring whether you understood it remained lawful prior to executing it." That requires an affirmative or negative response. "Our judicial units, did you personally approve the tracking of legislative query logs, affirmative or negative?" "Administrative choices regarding that scope remain managed at the subordinate tier." "Therefore, you remained ignorant it occurred," the representative stated. "I am denying that assertion." "Then you remained aware." "I am stating that the statutory analysis remains ongoing, and it seems improper to portray—" The top prosecutor's voice pierced through the crosstalk sharply. Both the representative and the witness paused. "You have currently stated during the identical response that you remain denying you remained ignorant and that administrative choices remain managed at the subordinate tier. The panel requires resolution. Did you personally understand that your agency tracked the query logs of lawmakers while they examined the archives?" "I remained cognizant that safeguard procedures existed regarding sensitive record analysis." "Safeguard procedures regarding the lawmakers examining records," the lawmaker stated, "or safeguard procedures regarding the records themselves." "The analysis setting incorporates—" "Which specific one?" the lawmaker stated. "Lawmakers or records?" 8 seconds of complete silence echoed. "You remain the top prosecutor of the nation," the lawmaker stated. "You remain the highest justice official within this republic. You serve as the individual accountable for guaranteeing the executive branch functions inside the statute. And you sit confronting this panel entirely unable to inform us whether you understood your agency tracked lawmakers or what statutory power permitted it." She hesitated momentarily. "That hardly constitutes a justification, Madam Attorney General." "That constitutes an admission." She permitted the chamber to digest it. Then she gazed toward the seating area, toward the segment near the rear wherein multiple females occupied seats exhibiting the specific motionless quality of individuals who journeyed a massive distance to occupy a chamber that commanded them to wait and remained waiting. "Survivors occupy this chamber today," the lawmaker stated. Her tone lowered in pitch, not quieter but heavily measured. Every syllable was deployed deliberately. "They waited forever. They visited this facility a fortnight ago whenever a representative inquired how many among them remained uncontacted by your agency." Everyone raised their arms. "Every lone individual." She stared at the witness. "These individuals hardly represent partisan accessories. These represent living souls whose pain became recorded and whose perpetrators functioned endlessly while entities turned a blind eye. They arrived here presently, several of them for the 3rd or 4th occasion, because they trusted that the nation's highest justice official might finally account for what her agency accomplished regarding the documentation of their tragedy." A momentary pause settled over them. "Whenever the representative requested you pivot and acknowledge them, you refused. I am requesting you presently. Can you gaze at the individuals inside this chamber and explain to them, not myself, but them, why their documents remain censored?" Why your agency informed them a registry existed whenever supposedly it absolutely did not. Why, whenever the legislature arrived to examine the records it forced you to disclose, your agency monitored their queries rather than resolving their inquiries. The witness pivoted partially. The lenses captured the exact perspective of a pivot that travels sufficiently far to prove it occurred, but insufficiently far to demand direct gaze with the females situated near the rear of the chamber. I previously conveyed my sincerest regrets to each victim, she stated. I labeled the perpetrator a beast. I maintained that they elevated their arms, the lawmaker stated softly. Every single individual among them. Whenever questioned whether your agency contacted them, everybody elevated their arms. She held her ground. The witness provided absolutely nothing that resolved the inquiry. Absolutely nothing possibly could. The lawmaker rose to her feet. For the primary instance spanning 3 hours, she rose to her feet, not employing theatrics, not utilizing the vigor of an act hitting its peak, with the measured, unhurried cadence of someone who executed meticulous labor and reached its conclusion. The chamber comprehended before she uttered a syllable. The shift regarding stance, the collecting of the binder, the motionless quality returning over her. The identical motionless quality she carried inside originally. The identical motionless quality that absorbed whatever the witness lobbed toward her, spanning 3 hours without flinching. Madam Attorney General. Her tone remained steady, never escalating. You initiated this inquiry by reminding this panel that you dedicated 15 years working as a prosecutor, that you recognize what proof resembles, that you comprehend what a proper inquiry necessitates. She stared at the witness sitting across the desk. I trust you. I assume you genuinely recognize what proof resembles, which explains why I assume you comprehended throughout the preceding 3 hours precisely where this remained heading. Because you possess intellect. You possess schooling, and you occupied enough judicial chambers to recognize what occurs whenever the records relay a narrative that the testifier completely fails to dispute. A momentary pause dominated the room. Therefore, allow me to relay that narrative clearly, strictly for the transcript. She avoided utilizing a display. She required absolutely none. She dedicated 3 hours positioning every record onto the desk that the display logically would feature. She simply narrated the narrative they established. Late summer 2013. You operate as the top state prosecutor. A lethal injection remains slated. You directly contact the executive and petition him to postpone it. The rationale: it clashes alongside your electoral fundraising event. A human's mortality gets rescheduled surrounding your electoral planner. Your exact phrases subsequently, I made a mistake. The trend becomes cemented during its initial notation. Whenever your desires and your obligations clash, your desires triumph. I completely resolved. I realize you certainly did, the lawmaker stated, avoiding interrupting her, simply affirming it. You resolved it frequently. You expressed regrets. And subsequently, during the identical month, the subsequent notation underwent drafting. She allowed that to settle before proceeding. Additionally, during late summer 2013, your agency examines grievances regarding the university. 24 altogether. The Northern prosecutor files a civil deception litigation. Your media representative informs the journalists you remain examining the scenario. 96 hours following that, $25,000 lands from the charitable foundation into your electoral ledger. 30 days subsequent to that, the analysis terminates. 0 inquiries, 0 consequences. The Northern prosecutor ultimately secures a massive settlement compensating alumni inside your jurisdiction that you refuse to shield. You encounter 0 repercussions. Fast forward to 2019, you exit your role. You instantly register acting as an international proxy representing a Middle Eastern monarchy. 6 figures monthly lands into your agency. You advocate to the legislature and federal bureaus benefiting an international regime. You execute this for an extended period, taking a short break to assist the executive during his initial ouster attempt, and subsequently you resume it. Winter of 2025, you assume the role of the top prosecutor. Spring of 2025, you authorize a massive aviation donation regarding the identical monarchy. You partook during the judicial evaluation of that donation. The Integrity Bureau analyzing your qualifications regarding this position answers directly to you. Currently, in 2025, the unsealed archives guaranteed openness. Severely censored records. A registry you declared rested on your table that your agency subsequently declared never existed. And whenever lawmakers arrived to examine the uncensored archives, records the legislature forced you to yield, your agency tracked whatever they queried. She stood positioned at the desk and stared at the witness unflinchingly. Representative, you dedicated 3 hours building a storyline engineered to render legal actions seem dishonest. I dedicated 3 hours reciting records, the lawmaker stated. Your monetary disclosures, your agency's messages, your personal open declarations, your agency's personal bulletins. I inserted absolutely nothing. I arranged whatever already existed. The portrayal regarding these occurrences relies strictly upon foundational records, the lawmaker stated. Your registry document represents a federal justice record. The tax board ruling represents a national archive. The State Integrity Board ruling represents a regional archive. The broadcast segment remains yours. The summer bulletin belongs to your agency. Every solitary record I positioned upon this desk currently originated from you, your agency, or a governmental entity evaluating your actions. I failed to portray anything. I simply recited. Therefore, you must recite the comprehensive background. Which background alters the chronology? The lawmaker queried. Which background clarifies why the payment landed 96 hours subsequent to your agency declaring it remained examining the university? Which background clarifies authorizing a massive donation from a nation you acted as a listed proxy for? Which background clarifies informing a broadcast network a registry rested on your table and subsequently your agency declaring it never existed? I reviewed everything accessible. I am requesting you to supply the background you assume alters the interpretation of these realities. Complete silence lingered. Every significant resolution spanning your vocation yielded a monetary recipient, the lawmaker proceeded. The lethal injection postponement enriched your campaign. The university non-inquiry enriched the executive, and $25,000 drawn from his foundation enriched your electoral ledger. The Middle Eastern advocacy enriched your firm. The aviation authorization enriched the executive. The document censorship enriches somebody, and I demand you inform this panel exactly who. The witness gaped openly. Prior to your response, the lawmaker stated, I desire to remind you that the individuals situated near the rear of this chamber waited endlessly seeking that response. Hardly hypothetically. Literally, they remain present. They remain observing. They elevated their arms whenever questioned whether your agency contacted them. She stared at the witness one ultimate moment. You dedicated 15 years showcasing yourself, representing the populace's attorney, the state's prosecutor, the individual who trails the proof wherever it directs irrespective of where it aims or whom it incriminates, the individual who holds authority responsible. She allowed the phrasing to linger. Madam Attorney General, who precisely remain you laboring for? The chamber remained utterly quiet. The witness's response, whenever it arrived, embodied everything a seasoned attorney could construct it to be. It pinpointed previous regimes' blunders. It referenced her history combating illicit trade and aggressive offenses. It summoned the supremacy of legislation possessing the fervor of an individual who uttered these phrases countless times and trusts them, or opted to behave as if she does. It remained thorough, professional, and logical. It resolved an entirely different inquiry than the one that underwent asking. I observe, the lawmaker stated softly whenever the witness concluded, that you continually failed to inform us who profits regarding the document censorship. Ongoing inquiries obstruct some... You informed the broadcast network during the summer that zero patron registry existed. If zero patrons exist, zero ongoing inquiries regarding patrons exist. Therefore, I will inquire anew, who profits by maintaining those archives censored? The quietude that ensued represented the lengthiest spanning the inquiry. The lawmaker reclaimed her seat. She required absolutely nothing further. The inquiry rested on the transcript, enduring, unresolved. And the chamber, the lenses, the press gallery, the pundits already crafting their articles, the victims near the rear who previously elevated their arms, all of them comprehended the gravity of a response that absolutely never materialized. The inquiry concluded 90 minutes subsequently after a trio of conservative lawmakers tendered drafted inquiries rather than voicing them publicly, representing the administrative equivalent of avoiding being captured on video adjacent to this disaster. And the panel leader declared the session adjourned, possessing the subdued demeanor of somebody terminating a banquet that progressed terribly. The witness exited via the congressional chamber's lateral doorway entirely flanked by her crew, possessing the rapid swiftness of somebody who desires to showcase that absolutely nothing monumental occurred and desires to showcase it instantly before the video snippets undergo editing, before the digital platform verdict gets delivered, and before the event that occurred turns into the event that everybody witnessed. Near the rear of the chamber, half a dozen females who journeyed to the Capitol to watch a top prosecutor account regarding whatever her agency accomplished regarding the documentation of their tragedy, stood up and collected their belongings silently. A single individual among them, a female who remained advocating regarding openness spanning half a decade, who occupied congressional chambers and media briefings and repeatedly heard to wait, who remained tolerant in the manner that folks act tolerant whenever they possess absolutely zero alternative, paused inside the corridor nearby. A staffer crossed paths. "Could you inform her?" the female began, paused, and began anew. "Could you inform her that today marked the initial moment we sensed like somebody asked our inquiries? Not inquiries regarding us, our inquiries, the ones we continuously tried to convince somebody to ask." The staffer confirmed she would inform her. The digital platform verdict landed prior to the nightly broadcast. "Were you deceiving the public during the winter, or are you deceiving the public currently?" was slated to become the snippet. That represented the snippet. That represented the entirety of it. The witness states she understands what proof resembles. The lawmaker says, "Fantastic. Permit me to display some," and proceeds to blanket the massive desk featuring proof spanning 3 hours. The Middle Eastern trajectory summarized in a solitary phrase: advocated for the monarchy, abandoned to shield the executive during ouster attempt, reverted back to the monarchy, assumed top prosecutor role, authorized massive Middle Eastern aviation vessel. She constructed this chronology herself using her personal vocational choices. Hundreds of her personal collegiate peers endorsed a correspondence declaring her a disgrace to their vocation. Hundreds straight from her personal academy. While she sits facing the legislature declaring to everybody she recognizes what honesty resembles, she utterly failed to identify the statute. The top justice official of the nation completely failed to identify the statute that permitted her agency to monitor the legislature. We remain examining the statutory justification regarding an action they already executed. The illicit patron registry rests on my table during the winter. Zero such registry exists during the summer. She uttered both statements publicly facing lenses acting as the top prosecutor and subsequently occupied a congressional chamber and attempted to inform the lawmaker she comprehends proof. The lawmaker avoided shouting, avoided acting, avoided needing to. She merely continued placing records onto the desk and requesting the witness to justify them. And the witness utterly failed. And the entire nation observed. The victims elevated their arms, every single individual among them. The witness pivoted partially, hardly entirely, merely partially. That partial pivot will track her permanently. Political pundits saturated the television networks ahead of the supper time frame. The Middle Eastern aviation sequence represents the element destined to undergo investigation, one individual declared on the network. She authorized a massive financial donation from a nation she served as a listed international proxy representing. That hardly constitutes a partisan hit. That constitutes an ethical clash inquiry featuring recorded proof linked. Somebody must resolve it formally, a judicial pundit noted on a separate network. She completely failed to resolve the monitoring statute inquiry. That represents the most disturbing instance of the inquiry affecting me personally as an attorney. We remain examining the statutory justification regarding an action your agency already executed. You absolutely do not monitor the legislature and subsequently go seeking the permission afterward. That hardly represents how the supremacy of legislation functions. That represents the inverse regarding how the supremacy of legislation functions. A conservative pundit commented begrudgingly. The $25,000 chronology consistently remained controversial. The lawmaker avoided attaching anything to it. She simply arranged it chronologically and forced everybody to observe it simultaneously within the identical chamber. That proves destructive since it completely avoids forcing you to trust anything apart from the chronology. The chronology represents the issue. Within the Federal Justice Building that evening, top personnel labored late, performing the tasks that follow a disastrous inquiry, cataloging whatever demands resolving, whatever remains controllable, whatever remains enduring. They attempted to uncover the perspectives. She blindsided her using proxy registries submitted with the Federal Justice Building, using tax board records, using a broadcast network segment that the witness directly filmed, using a state integrity board ruling that existed inside the regional public archives spanning over a decade. The $25,000 underwent debate repeatedly, and whenever it underwent debate, the verdict remained identical. The timing proved devastating. The State Integrity Board declared it provoked skepticism, and the exchange that deposited the funds directly into the electoral ledger constituted an illicit donation drawn from a charitable entity. Absolutely none of that altered. The lawmaker merely inserted it inside a chamber where the witness remained forced to sit motionless and observe it. The Middle Eastern advocacy underwent revelation. The proxy registry remained accessible. Whatever completely escaped being inserted inside a chamber previously remained the proxy registry positioned adjacent to the Middle Eastern aviation authorization a half-decade apart, featuring a chronology linking them. The monitoring inquiry proved brutal. The top justice official of the nation testified under oath facing the Legislative Justice Panel that her agency remained examining the statutory justification regarding an action it previously executed. That rested on the transcript. Absolutely zero portrayal altered what that phrase signified. A senior administrator late during the evening voiced what the chamber spent 3 hours circling. She entirely avoided fabricating the issue. She recorded it. We may push against the portrayal, yet we utterly cannot push against the records. The records represent ours. Nobody answered that statement. It necessitated zero response. It necessitated a blueprint, and absolutely nobody possessed one that functioned. The unnamed comments that surfaced inside the media throughout the subsequent couple of days proved more defeated than typical. Hardly the hostile pivot of a crew going offensive, but rather the measured phrasing of individuals attempting to constrain the fallout regarding whatever already happened. A political publication noted multiple federal justice administrators commenting under rules of anonymity declared the inquiry expedited internal talks regarding the agency's stance regarding the censored archives. The issue remains she delivered a declaration during the winter that the summer bulletin disputes. A single administrator stated absolutely zero scenario exists regarding that situation, which fails to demand some type of resolution. The Capital newspaper noted 2 conservative lawmakers who refused to undergo identification declared the Middle Eastern ethical clash inquiry remained firmly planted, and that they initiated talks alongside their peers regarding whether to demand an official audit. The proxy registry constitutes an accessible record. A single lawmaker stated she served as a listed international proxy representing this nation. She authorized a massive financial donation directly from this nation. We require comprehending exactly how that verdict occurred. The roster of enduring elements ran lengthy. Everybody inside the facility comprehended it. The inquiry concluded, yet the transcript absolutely did not. The initial repercussion landed a couple of days later. The Federal Internal Watchdog Bureau launched an official audit analyzing the agency's tracking of legislative query logs spanning the censored archive analysis timeframe. The recommendation arrived sourced from 11 lawmakers, 7 liberals alongside 4 conservatives. The official bulletin utilized measured phrasing, yet the implication proved unmistakable. The top justice official's agency currently underwent investigation driven by its internal auditor regarding monitoring the legislative branch. The banner inside the Capitol newspaper stated that the federal watchdog launched an audit analyzing legislative monitoring beneath the top prosecutor. The banner inside the Metropolitan newspaper stated that the top prosecutor's justice agency confronted an internal audit subsequent to inquiry discoveries. The conservative broadcast network aired the segment during the bottom of the hour. The secondary repercussion landed 96 hours subsequently, driven by relentless pressure sourced from 3 conservative lawmakers who suffered public identification. A couple of them faced electoral contests heading into 2026. A single individual among them served as the senior member of the Upper Legislative Justice Panel. The Executive Mansion's Judicial Bureau reached out to the top prosecutor's crew. The dialogue, which spilled to the political publication within a single day, underwent description as blunt and hardly pleasant. The witness endorsed an abstention document on a Friday afternoon, 5 days following the inquiry. The record underwent filing alongside the Federal Justice Integrity Bureau and entered into the accessible archive. It declared that the top prosecutor officially removed herself regarding any administrative issues concerning the Middle Eastern monarchy or organizations holding substantial Middle Eastern connections, referencing her previous advocacy work operating as an international proxy. The declaration attached to the document stated she executed this to guarantee the illusion of neutrality. The media interpreted it accurately. She executed this strictly because she lacked any alternate choice. The financial newspaper's banner stated she abstains from Middle Eastern issues following ethical queries, facing pressure sourced from conservative lawmakers. The abstention document currently remained enduring. It permanently attached to her title within every biography, every digital encyclopedia page, every upcoming mention regarding her administration. The top prosecutor of the nation, the country's primary justice official, remained mandated to officially detach herself regarding issues incorporating an international administration she previously received payment to advocate for subsequent to a legislative inquiry, rendering the clash impossible to ignore. The tertiary repercussion landed a week following the inquiry. The Media Bureau representing her former legal academy released a declaration. It avoided denouncing the top prosecutor specifically by title. It stated merely that the Academy reiterates its dedication regarding the moral criteria that steer the judicial vocation, incorporating honesty, openness, and the duty to assist the societal benefit ahead of private benefit. The declaration measured exactly 4 phrases long. It represented the most destructive 4 phrases a judicial academy completely ever authored regarding a singular alumnus, entirely avoiding utilizing her title. Hundreds of collegiate alumni endorsed the correspondence to provoke it. Every single individual among them understood exactly what the declaration signified. Every journalist who covered it understood exactly what it signified. The top prosecutor's Media Bureau entirely avoided answering regarding petitions seeking input. The quaternary repercussion landed a week and a half following the inquiry. The Federal Justice Agency released an official documented alteration regarding the accessible archive, deposited alongside the National Ledger and transmitted directly to the Legislative Justice Panel. The alteration declared utilizing the measured phrasing of administrative responsibility that the Winter Declaration, implying the reality of an illicit patron registry, remained inaccurate, and that subsequent internal analysis uncovered zero documented proof confirming the reality of any such registry. It served, utilizing official administrative phrasing, as a retraction. The top prosecutor of the nation previously informed a broadcast network publicly facing countless viewers that a registry of illicit patrons rested on her table. Her personal agency currently officially altered that declaration via a record deposited alongside the national administration. The Lawmakers Bureau obtained a duplicate regarding the alteration the morning it underwent depositing. Her primary administrator generated a physical copy and carried it to her table entirely without remark. The lawmaker reviewed it. She placed it down and stared at it momentarily. She stated she recognizes what proof resembles, she uttered. Her primary administrator bobbed her head. Archive it. A month and a half following the inquiry, the witness persisted acting as the top prosecutor. She featured during media updates. She delivered declarations. She ran media briefings regarding perimeter security and illicit trafficking and the executive administration's justice mandates. She executed the duties of the position utilizing vocational skill and the rehearsed composure of somebody who concluded that onward momentum represents the singular feasible blueprint. Yet something shifted regarding how the Bureau operated surrounding her. Federal justice personnel conversing to journalists anonymously detailed an agency steering around a sequence of official restrictions that previously entirely failed to exist before the fall. The abstention document, the internal audit, the official alteration to the censored archive transcript. 3 distinct oversight instruments, each forged within the week and a half succeeding a lengthy inquiry, each enduring, each creating its personal documentation and legislative obligations. A senior federal justice administrator referenced anonymously inside the Capitol newspaper a month and a half later stated she remains situated here. She remains executing the duties. Yet spaces exist she entirely cannot enter anymore. Decisions exist she entirely cannot finalize. Issues exist she remained forced to relinquish. And whenever anybody views her designation presently, an asterisk exists. The abstention, the internal audit, the alteration. Those absolutely never vanish. A conservative operative referenced directly inside the political publication stated that the issue remains the endurance. You might rebound following a disastrous inquiry. You absolutely cannot retract an abstention document. You absolutely cannot retract launching an internal audit. Those elements reside within the transcript. They track her toward every upcoming role she entirely ever occupies. 3 conservative lawmakers who previously served as dependable advocates regarding the witnesses' vetting verdicts entirely ceased advocating for her publicly. They avoided targeting her either. They merely ceased remarking. That specific silence carried its personal significance within the Capitol. Everybody comprehended it. Inside her legislative suite, the lawmaker remained analyzing the federal internal watchdog's initial discoveries whenever her primary administrator rapped on the doorway. The academic correspondence creator rang, she stated. He desired to transmit something forward. She handed the lawmaker a physical electronic message. It originated from a judicial academic at the university, a returning student presently matriculated, who viewed the inquiry inside a library chamber alongside peers. The message stated that he remained debating abandoning his studies, not due to the legislation, but due to whatever he continuously viewed the legislation being weaponized to accomplish. Following viewing the inquiry, I rang my folks and informed them I remain enrolled. I desire to execute whatever she executes. I desire to recognize the archives the exact way she recognizes the archives. The lawmaker reviewed it twice, placed it down, grabbed the subsequent archive. It remained accumulating, spanning a quarter of a year. Separate bureau, separate title, separate collection of monetary transparency documents that entirely failed to perfectly match, alongside the verdicts that succeeded them. The identical pathway. The funds constantly generated the identical pathway. You simply needed to remain tolerant enough to trail it starting at the origin, heading to the conclusion, and arrange it sequentially. Her cellular device vibrated. The representative stated the federal internal watchdog just broadened the parameters of the monitoring audit, encompassing every legislative oversight action spanning the preceding 8 months. Your inquiry unlocked this gateway. It completely refuses to shut. She positioned the cellular device screen downward, unsealed the archive, and navigated to the primary sheet. Certain individuals forge vocations atop the gap separating whatever they declare and whatever they execute, atop the chasm separating their accessible transcript and their hidden choices, atop the certainty that absolutely nobody will ever sit still and review everything, arrange everything, link the contribution to the verdict and the advocacy agreement to the authorization and the winter declaration to the summer alteration, and subsequently rise inside a chamber packed with lenses and demand they justify it. The top prosecutor forged that vocation spanning 15 years inside her native state, and subsequently inside the advocacy sphere, and subsequently inside an executive's ouster defense, and subsequently inside the highest justice role within the country. She functioned inside the gap separating consequence and its void. She remained talented at it, proficient, rehearsed. She survived events that logically should have terminated vocations until the moment an equality litigator hailing from the South dedicated a quarter of a year reviewing her monetary documents, her proxy registries, her electoral archives, her accessible declarations, and her agency's personal submissions, and subsequently strolled into a congressional chamber and arranged everything sequentially. Record following record, period following period, dollar following dollar, and posed the inquiry that 15 years of meticulous steering completely never forced her to resolve openly under oath broadcasted on television. Who precisely remain you laboring for? She completely refused to resolve it. She resolved alternate inquiries. She deflected. She targeted. She referenced previous regimes and her personal prosecutorial history and the labor she felt proud of and the missions she assisted. Yet she entirely refused to resolve that inquiry, and the chamber comprehended, and the transcript documented it, and the abstention document underwent filing, and the internal audit underwent launching, and the academic declaration underwent releasing, and the alteration underwent logging into the national ledger. And a judicial academic down south opted to remain matriculated, and the subsequent archive currently sat unsealed. The funds constantly generate a pathway. The Texas representative simply trailed it straight to its culmination.